The notes, if you want a copy of the notes, we're going to be covering a lot of things tonight. So, and some of them are kind of goofy. Don't even try to take notes. I'm probably going to move kind of fast, but they're all there. And what I did is I put in a table of contents so you can find each session. So on the first page, it'll say 1 through how many ever pages it is for each one. So if you want to be able to get to that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with a very short review of the challenge of the Quran. We've been challenged to produce something like it, produce 10 chapters like it, a single chapter, or even a statement. But the bigger issue this week is we're going to say, is it a better guiding book? And we're also going to challenge, is it a more historical book? So we're going to be learning some vocabulary that people do to evaluate whether or not people are telling the truth or lies. We're going to be looking at this through the thread of the 5 pillars of Islam. And if you remember back, we are on the 5th pillar, or Hajj, and we're going to see how many pagan things that we've kind of will come out of this. And next week we'll be finishing up Hajj. But in the interim, what is Hajj? Hajj is this pilgrimage that people take to Mecca, and I really want us to pay attention to where Mecca is in relation to the rest of the biblical story. We're going to be touching on that. When they start Hajj, they dress in Hajj clothes, and they have to kind of make an intention when they start it. They go around this black box, and as we mentioned last week and the week before, all of the prayers for any Muslim in the world is toward this black box. Now, who built this black box? They don't really know. Maybe Adam did the first time, maybe it was destroyed. But Ishmael and, well, I'm going to put that in air quotes, and Ibrahim or Abraham are said to have built this box. So if you remember something from this first part is who built the prayer box, who set the stone, is Abraham and Ishmael. Okay? The next thing that's really important is Muhammad literate or illiterate? So Muhammad is illiterate. Now, why does that matter? Because if I'm writing down a story that is legend or made up, I can then go back and go, did I lie? And I can go, oh, okay, this is it. The other thing is if I'm relaying a story, let's say I hear a story, it kind of doesn't matter what that story is. Somebody could tell me the story of the Lord of the Rings, and if you're not able to go back and check your sources, you can end up having this game of telephone where the story comes into your head and what you repeat isn't quite exactly the same as what you heard. At the corner of this Kaaba is this black stone, and what we saw last week, we looked at Islam Web, and the importance of this stone is so important. By Allah, Allah will bring it on the day of resurrection, having 2 eyes that it sees, with a tongue to speak, in order to bear witness for those who sincerely touched and kissed it. So we looked at just, wow, this is essentially idol worship. If you're prostrating yourself to a stone that's going to come to life and testify whether or not you kissed it and touched it, essentially that is the definition of idol worship. So that's kind of where we are. Now, the first vocabulary word we're going to learn is something called anachronism. And anachronisms are very important when you're evaluating when something was written. So an anachronism is an error in chronology. So it's something that's out of place. So for example, one of the more famous movie anachronisms is Braveheart. It's set in the late 1200s. And they didn't have any of the similar costumes to this. The tartan costumes didn't even appear till 400 years later. Now, why did they do that? They do this for story continuity. When people think of what's happening over there, this is what they think people have looked like for all of history. And so it's kind of funny. And so it's used as storytelling. No one is going to the producer of this film and the costume designers and going, hey, this is a problem. But if somebody was actually using this for an historical, to go, hey, wait a minute, is this totally accurate? They'd quickly go, it isn't. You see funny ones in like Shakespeare. So the Julius Caesar, Brutus goes, count the clock. Cassius says, the clock has stricken 3. Now, this was set in 44 AD, and the first clock of this style is 1,200 years later. Now, for his audience, though, this would have brought in some drama. And so we see this type of thing used fairly often in storytelling. And so what I like to do is I like to take people through examples so you understand. So when you see anachronisms, if you kind of can follow where they are, they're easier to spot kind of everywhere in life. So let's look at some anachronisms in Mormonism, because the Book of Mormon is full of really funny anachronisms, because Joseph Smith basically didn't study history, and he was a storyteller. His father was a storyteller. And so one of my favorite quotes by him is the history of the church. By the way, he wrote this. This is his history. You can go to lds.org. And you notice sometimes when people aren't telling the truth, they really try to emphasize that they're telling the truth. So this is Joseph Smith Jr. I told the brethren that the Book of Mormon was the most correct book of any book on earth and the keystone of our religion. Now, if we just step back and somebody goes, this is the most correct book, and they wrote it, of any book on earth, you can kind of already, you should be questioning that. So the Book of Mormon is completed, and these dates, when you're looking at anachronisms, why so many people miss them, is the dates matter. So in 1829, it's completed, but 1830 is when the Book of Mormon is published. Okay? Now within the Book of Mormon, these stories that he says they happen, the place, so we're going to be reading some from Ether, that's 2200 BC. So this would be way back. Way back. So if you're reading in their book of Ether, think 2200 BC, Nephi is going to be 600 BC. And what you do when you start to flip through it is the Book of Mormon, by the way, is also set in North America. So bear that in mind. So you have to go, what was in North America 2,000 years before Christ or 600 years before Christ? And you'll find over and over again there, and you see Ether and Nephi and these things, is that it talks about cattle for the use of man. We know that there were no cows prior to the New World. So that's one of the immediate ways you can spot a lie. If someone says this is a historical account from 2300 BC and there's something there that was never on that continent, you can cry foul, and that's what they do. He loved, Joseph Smith Jr. loved these stories, like Arabian Nights. In fact, he even claimed to want to be the Muhammad for the Americas. And so you see things like elephants. There is zero evidence that elephants were there 2200 years before Christ. He has horses, goats, swine. There is zero archaeologic evidence that they were present prior to Columbus. Windows, again, Ether, and here's directly from the Book of Mormon. And he cried out unto the Lord, saying, O Lord, behold, I have done even as you have, he writes in King James English, as you hast commanded me, and I've prepared vessels for my people, and behold, there's no light in them. Behold, O Lord, wilt thou suffer that we shall cross this great water in darkness? And the Lord said unto brother Jared, What will ye that I should do, that ye may have light in your vessels? For behold, ye cannot have windows, for they will be dashed into pieces. Now, that sounds like a great story to write, but were there windows that could be dashed into pieces at 2200 BC? Is this then the most correct book on earth? Of course not. So, there's scimitars. There's so many of these things that are just, I find them humorous when I go through and you actually start to read these books because they're just based on fantasy. One of my favorite, if you get a chance, go to YouTube and look at Nephi's steel bow. So we have to remember this is 600 BC. So if you go in there, you'll see the church's official kind of like reenactment of it. And he has this steel bow that he pulls back. It's very dramatic. They have lots of great lessons. And he overdraws the steel and the bow breaks. And so they will say, well, the King James Version uses the word steel. And so a lot of times we have to look at the King James Version. Their idea of steel came from 1611. That would also include brass and bronze. Joseph Smith's idea of steel, however, has to be from the late 1820s up to 1830. The steel that we had then was actually steel. So you have to actually look and go, when was something translated? What are they saying about it? And we'll see there he was off an additional almost 2,300 years for that. He has Americanized and Spanish origin names in there. But I want to have within you this idea that anachronisms, if they are present, can automatically count something as false. So now let's look at the Quran. Now that hopefully you understand that word a little bit better. And so Quran 482, do they not reflect then on the Quran? This is, again, the Quran is the words of Allah. Muhammad is reciting them, telling people. So Muhammad is saying that Allah is saying, do they not reflect on the Quran? Had it been from anyone other than Allah, they would have found many inconsistency. So that's the English version from the Clear Quran. In the Sahih International, it says they found within it much contradiction. If you look at Pictal, which is a English kind of, people would say it's like a word for word, more translation, they would say incongruity. So let's take this challenge and look at the Quran. The 12th surah, and I'll use chapter verse. So the 12th chapter, 20th verse, Joseph's brethren sold him for a miserable price. For a few dirhams counted out, in such low estimation did they hold him. Now, dirhams were a coin in Arabia. But there was also the word for money, or gold, or silver. So in this perfectly preserved book, that's their challenge, is the Quran is perfectly preserved. They're going to use a version of the Greek drachma. Again, this is, not surprisingly, 2,300 years. When was Joseph? He was 1765 years before Christ. Dirhams, the earliest ones we get are in the 600s. So an anachronism, false. Chainmail, this one I found really funny. This is from 34:10 through 11. We bestowed grace aforetime on David, this is King David, from ourselves. O ye mountains, sing ye back the praises of Allah with him. Ye birds also, and we made the iron soft for him, commanding, make thou coats of mail, balancing well the rings of chain armor, and work ye righteousness, for be sure I see clearly all that you do. King David is about 1,000 years before Christ. The first example of chainmail is about 300 BC. So again, we're seeing these huge 500-year anachronisms in Islam. Crucifixion. So this is from the surah called Yusuf. It's Joseph. It's the 12th surah. So this is the story when Joseph is in prison. And the two people come to him and he interprets their dream. "O two companions of prison, as for one of you, he will give drink to his master of wine, but the other he will be crucified, and the birds will eat from his head. The matter has been decreed about which you both inquire." Okay, we see later in the same one, it says, "And he said to the one whom he knew would go free, 'Mention me before the master.' But Satan made him forget to mention it to his master." So just to verify that this is the same biblical Joseph, and we know the date of when he is. Later that was the 12th chapter. Now we're going to jump forward to the 20th chapter. "Pharaoh said, 'You believed him before I gave you permission. Indeed, he is your leader who has taught you magic.'" So this is Moses, by the way. This is Moses and Pharaoh. They're throwing down the rod, which becomes a snake. Moses then comes and eats the other. And in the Islamic version, what happens is the magicians of Pharaoh's court all say, "We are going to follow Moses' God. He is following the true God." When Pharaoh sees this, this is what Pharaoh says. "Pharaoh, you believed him before I gave you permission," meaning you guys are believing him now. "Indeed, he is your leader who has taught you magic. So I will surely cut off your hands and your feet on the opposite sides." Gives you a little insight into Muhammad. "And I will crucify you on the trunks of palm trees, and you will surely know which of us is more severe in giving punishment and more enduring." What do we know about crucifixion? Again, Joseph was when? Roughly 1800, 18th and 19th century before Christ. The Persians are credited with inventing crucifixion in the 6th century before Christ. 1,200 years later. Now you see the problem of having a prophet who's illiterate. He doesn't know the stories. He talks about Samaritans. This is in 2087. We did not break our promise to you by our will. We were made to carry burdens from the ornaments of the people of Pharaoh, and we threw them into the fire, and thus did the Samari throw. That are the Samaritans. The Samaritans didn't even exist as a people during the time of Moses. This is all in the canon of the Quran. Now we get to those stories where they get people mixed up. So it would be kind of like mixing up maybe Superman with one, and then in another universe, it's Samwise Gamgee and Superman, and they're going out together, and the thing. And so Haman opposes Moses, "And we wish to be gracious to those who are being depressed in the land, and to make them leaders in faith and make them heirs, to establish a firm place for them in the land, and to show Pharaoh, Haman, and their host at their hands the very things against which they were taking precautions. So we sent the inspiration to the mother of Moses, suckle thy child, but when thou hast fears about him, cast him into the river." And so we see when this is. Was Haman a contemporary of Moses? No, he was of Esther. And so Muhammad just got things mixed up. We're going to keep reading here in the 28th chapter. "Then the people of Pharaoh picked him up from the river. It was intended that Moses should be to them an adversary and a cause for sorrow. For Pharaoh and Haman and all their host were men of sin." Haman is 9 centuries after Moses. Now when you step back and I go, what is the Quran written in? Arabic. What are the prayers in? Arabic. And you see these just obvious things that are like, well, this makes no sense. And I'm telling you, the average Muslim has no idea. They're not reading their Quran. And if they are, they aren't looking at the biblical, historical evidences of these things. So having a few of these and go, well, this kind of doesn't make sense. We see Muhammad also plagiarized extensively. Now, his plagiarism obviously is oral. It's not written. If it had been written, he could have actually kept those straight as well. So we're going to learn about dual carnane and the sun. And so this is in the Quran. This tells us where the sun sets. Till when he reached the setting place of the sun, he found it setting in a muddy spring and found a people thereabout. So apparently the sun goes to the muddy spring. There's people around it. And this dual carnane saw this all happen. We said, "O dual carnane, either punish or show them kindness." So the sun sets in a muddy spring. Now, where does the sun come from? We can also continue to the next verse. Till when he reached the place of the rising sun, he found it rising on a people for whom we had appointed no shelter therefrom. So, sun sets in a muddy spring, according to the Quran, surrounded by people, and it comes up somewhere. Now, dual carnane is literally means the two-horned one. And so, the challenge with some of these stories is you have to have a little bit of an understanding of history. So you'll see behind me a coin showing dual carnane, the horned one, the dual horned one. And this is from about 300 BC, roughly, this coin. So in the Alexander Romance, these are traditions based on Syriac legends. There's this Alexander the Great myth. And it talks about the sun setting. There's a fetid sea. A fetid sea is a nasty sea, an algae sea, or some would say a muddy sea. So these legends were going around for 700-800 years, and Muhammad's hearing these as caravans go. They're great storytellers, so why not put it in the Quran? Well, the main reason not to do it is he's attributing that then to God. Is this then a correct guiding book? So what we saw Joseph Smith do is go, there is no greater book on earth. Now, what were the contemporaries of Muhammad claiming about him? Do we have any other manuscripts of people criticizing Muhammad? Unfortunately, almost no manuscripts are around from that time. It was mostly an oral society. But we do know, based on their most trusted sources. So listen and see if this sounds like somebody who's telling the truth. See if Muhammad is getting constantly, basically criticized for inventing the Quran. This is Quran. These are all going to be different references. Quran 1038. Or do they say he invented it? Again, this is in the Quran, and Allah is trying to defend him. Say then, bring forth a surah like it, if you be truthful. Quran 1788. They could not produce the like of it. Quran 32:2. Or do they say he invented it? Rather, it is the truth from your Lord, O Muhammad, that you must warn a people. Quran 46:8. Or do they say he invented it? And he is the forgiving and merciful. He invented it. Rather, this is truth from our Lord. Quran 25:4 and 5. And those who disbelieve say, this is not but a lie he invented. And another people insisted him in it. But they have committed an injustice and a lie. So they have their lies for saying he's liar. So I told you, no, I told you so, no, I told you. And they say, legends of the former peoples which he has written down, and they are dictated to him in the morning and the afternoon. So you get another time, he's making it up. Quran 6:25. This is not but legends of the former people. Quran 6:7. And if we had sent down to you a written scripture on page, and they touched it with their hands, the disbelievers would say, this is not but obvious magic. Quran 8:31. Are you seeing how many times he's having to defend himself from his contemporaries? We actually know everyone around him was just like, no, you're making this up. These are former legends. And when our verses are recited to them, they say, we have heard, if we willed, we could say something like this. This is not but legends of the former people. I'm going somewhere with this, by the way. When our verses are recited to him, he says, legends of the former peoples. Quran 83:13. Each one of those has been different. Quran 52:33 through 34. Or do they say he has made it up? Rather, do they not believe? Quran 11:35. I promise I'm almost done. Or do they say he invented it? Say, if I have invented it upon me, the consequence of my crime, I am innocent of what crimes you commit. So they're, again, saying he's lying, and he's like, no, but really. And so this one is, I at the beginning of the class, I always say, then bring 10 surahs like it. But the first part of this, it says, or do they say he invented it? So over and over and over and over, thankfully, Muhammad records how many people basically claimed he was a liar, defending himself. And this is written down. Quran 69:44 through 47. And if Muhammad had made up about us some false sayings, we would have seized him by the right hand. Then we would have cut him in the aorta, and there is no one of you who could prevent us from doing it. So Muhammad is saying, Allah is saying, if I'm making this up, God will kill me. And how he's going to kill me is he's going to sever my aorta. And so his challenge is like, God wouldn't have allowed me to do this. What's also kind of interesting about this, when we look at how Muhammad dies, by his own words, from their most trusted sources. So this will be Sahih Bukhari. How are we going to guess he dies? By a severed aorta. The Prophet in his ailment in which he died used to say, "Oh Aisha," that's to his wife, "I still feel the pain caused by the food I ate at Khaybar. At this time, I feel as if my aorta is being cut from that poison." Interesting, we won't go a ton into this story, but he goes and basically decimates a whole bunch of Jews at Khaybar and asks a Jewish woman to cook for him. And then eats her food, and not shockingly, she poisons him, and ultimately that's how he dies, was from a Jew. So we look at all of these things. We look at these anachronisms in the Quran. We look at this essentially plagiarism. We look at these inaccuracies. We look at these petty responses to people. If you go and look at a lot of histories, you're not going to go see when somebody, whoever it is, Abraham Lincoln's biography, Abraham Lincoln is kind of like, he's honest Abe. Well, this really happened. This really happened. No, I know you guys are saying I'm lying, but you're just not going to find that. You find that with people who are not telling the truth. So let's take all of that combined with the Kaaba and Hajj, and we're going to overlay that with our next vocabulary word that's going to be very important to understand. This word is called retrojection. Retrojection is the act of projecting something into the past. It inserts historical anachronisms. That's why I went over anachronisms. You can't understand retrojection without understanding what an anachronism is. Placing present-day beliefs or ideas into this historical context that did not exist at the time. A really simple way to put it is this is retroactive attribution. And this is a very important, you start to see this throughout today, you see it all sorts of time. And the reason why this matters is when you can retroactively attribute something to someone, if something is actually attributed to someone, that item can be very elevated in value. It can be considered way more worthy. And so if we take a 1985 Ford Escort, you could buy that for about 10,000 pounds. This was a fast car at the time, so it did 0 to 60 in about 8.5 seconds, or like a modern day minivan. And it had a turbocharged 132 horsepower engine. Now, if you went to buy that car today in excellent condition, it is a collector car. It was a little bit rare. But if you had a black car that was owned by Princess Diana, that sold for 730 pounds. So that's roughly $1 million. Now you can see why attributing something to an object is very important. That provenance is very important. People wanted to own the same car Princess Diana did. I can do this with almost anything. I can take a Martin D18E guitar. You can buy it on Amazon for about $4,400. However, if Kurt Cobain owned that very same Martin D18, it would be worth $6 million. Can you see why having, now this is actual attribution. This is why provenance matters so much. This is why making, if there's some historical document, they always want to make sure, hey, where is the proof? We take parchment. You can buy parchment on Amazon for $7. Parchment, supposedly, as we saw in a previous lecture that Muhammad had, was worth 23 pounds of gold. Now, what is this? This is actually retrojection. Retrojection is going back and claiming Muhammad actually did something when he didn't. This was a hoax. So you can see why this happens. So let's look at retrojection in another religion. We'll kind of go through this because the exact same retrojection in Mormonism is the same one in Islam. The difference is Christians today do not reject the retrojection in Islam. They do in the obvious falseness of Mormonism. So within the standard works of Mormonism, most people just say, oh, it's the Bible and the Book of Mormon. There's actually, within their standard works, there's the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, which we're going to be talking about in the Bible. Within the Pearl of Great Price, there's called the Book of Abraham. Okay? Some of the works in the Book of Abraham are some of the most important doctrines that cover Mormonism. For example, going to Kolob, their heaven. The pre-existence, they would call the plan of happiness, all comes from these hieroglyphics that came from the Book of Abraham. So what historians want to do is they want to say, is this Book of Abraham that Mormons are claiming that Abraham actually wrote, did Abraham write it, or did Joseph Smith want to elevate his ideas by just claiming Abraham wrote it? There's lots of people. You have the black Hebrew Israelites. They're like, we're the true sons of Abraham. They're claiming retrojection, retroactive attribution of their bloodline. So we just go back and we look what was happening at the same time in the 1820s that was going around Joseph Smith Jr. And mummy mania was, in fact, there's so much written on this, was very exciting at this time. And they used mummy brown paint. They had ground mummy that a lot of people were taking as, kind of a tablet. Now, most of it was just all scammery. And they were just people claiming, oh, this is X, Y, and Z. So in this, we get this Book of Abraham. And in these mummies and several of these papyri were getting sent around the U.S., and they would have these mummy shows, and people would pay decent money to go see these mummies. So the Book of Abraham, this is what we read there. And by the way, this is from the Mormon Church. This is not from anti-Mormon anything. You can go and read from their own documents. These had been unrolled. It's referring to these parchments that are going to make up this important doctrine from the Book of Abraham, which the prophet had purchased at a cost of $2,400. By some inexplicable mode, the storekeeper informed me Joseph Smith Jr., had discovered that these sheets contain the writings of Abraham written by his own hand. That means Abraham's hand while in Egypt. Imagine how special that is. These documents that had been lost are now found. Again, this is what Joseph Smith Jr. writes, and this is the History of the Church, Volume 2, Chapter 16. You can go look this up. Soon after this, some of the saints at Kirtland purchased the mummies in a papyrus, a description of which will appear hereafter. And with Phelps and Cowdery as scribes, I commenced the translation of some of those characters of hieroglyphics, and much to our joy found that one of the rolls contains the writings of Abraham and another Joseph of Egypt. What was Joseph Smith Jr.'s ability to translate? He would look in a hat with stones, or he had special glasses. He didn't ever study Egyptology or hieroglyphics. He was just making this up. Wilford Woodruff, Joseph the seer, he could see things, has presented us some of the book of Abraham, which was written by Abraham's own hand, but hid from the knowledge of man for 4,000 years. It's now come to the light. Retroactive, attribution, retrojection. So in 1880, this book is canonized. Mormon apologist, look at the date here. Up into the 1900s, they were still defending the book of Abraham. The book of Abraham will someday be reckoned as one of the most remarkable documents in existence. The writings of Abraham must of necessity be older than in the original text of Genesis. And in every single Book of Mormon today, you will find these facsimiles. Every one you pick up, this will be there in the Pearl of Great Price. Joseph Smith then dies. These papyri go to one of his many wives, his prominent first wife, Emma. Emma takes these. There's some kind of a fracturing of the Mormon church because basically Brigham Young took over. She wasn't happy about it. She gives these papyri to a museum in Chicago for safekeeping. And unfortunately, in 1871, the Great Chicago Fire, over 17,000 buildings burned down in the Great Chicago Fire. And literally, like 1 out of 3 residents in Chicago are homeless. It was a huge fire, including the museum gets burnt to the ground. Shortly around this time, but it hasn't been published, the Rosetta Stone, this amazing discovery that was in 1799, has the same decree in 3 languages. And what is so amazing about the Rosetta Stone is we know one of the languages, and we know a bit of the second, and the third was Egyptian. So with the Rosetta Stone, because we knew what it said, we could then go back and start to evaluate an unknown language that was totally lost. The Rosetta Stone opened up all sorts of things. The first book is happening later than this. What happens when the Rosetta Stone comes out is they go back and start to look at these Mormon facsimiles, the copies, because they had all the copies that the Mormons had, and they're like, these are total frauds. So this literally makes the front page of the New York Times. And what do they say? Is sacred books claimed to have been given divinely to the first prophet are shown to be taken old Egyptian originals, their translations being a work of the imagination. What a comparison with Metropolitan Museum treasure shows. So they just say this is utter nonsense. And when we look at both, Joseph Smith is the one that's on your right. We don't have the full copy. And he literally wrote in what he thought the head would look like. And what we find is that, no, this is just something from the Book of Breathings. We have lots of copies. We know exactly what they're about. They're funerary documents. So how does the church respond? The church responds then in 1913. This is, you got to understand, 1912, New York Times, back then the newspapers were everything. They are like, Mormonism's total fraud, Joseph Smith's a fraud. Shortly after this, because that was in December of 1912, you get John Evans, who says, less than 1/7 of the whole book of Abraham was represented by the facsimile portions that everyone knows about. And even that only as an accompaniment to the text. Evans argued that in order to give a fair test of Joseph's true ability to translate Egyptian, and before the scholars could get away with charging that the entire book of Abraham is a false translation, they would have to examine the original papyrus or copy of it. So what they're saying is we don't have the copy. Why? Because everything burnt down in the Great Chicago Fire. So they're like, well, we don't totally know. And the challenge that Joseph Smith had is this is what he had to work with. Now, how do we know that's what he had to work with? Were there photos then? No, there were not. Well, what happened is the papyri survived. It was transported from Chicago prior to the fire and put in the Met, the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. In 1967, it was discovered. So the Metropolitan Museum of Art gifts the papyri back to the LDS Church. It includes the hieroglyphics accompanying these images, showing indeed that he was a fraud. So this is indisputable evidence that the papyrus is a funerary document, the Book of Breathings, late funerary text, intended to enable deceased people to continue to exist after the afterlife. The Book of Breathings, they come from about this era, because there's quite a few now that have been discovered, from about 350 years BC. Abraham is 2000 BC. Why then do people do retroactive attribution? It elevates it. If you could have something, Jesus Christ had this document, Abraham had this document, people would pay pounds of gold if Muhammad had this document. We look at what the experts say. The book turned out to be nothing but page after page of nonsensical gibberish. This is looking at how he translated it. Though it had apparently succeeded at one time in impressing unsophisticated minds, the work was unable to withstand the scrutiny of experts. This is from the book by his own hand. Edwards puts the whole work largely a piece of imagination, lacking any kind of scientific value. He added, it reminded him of the writings of psychic practitioners who are sometimes sent to me. So totally false. How does the church, how did Joseph Smith handle criticism during his time? This is from Teachings of the President of the Church. If you go to LDS.org, put in the search bar, Teachings of the Presidents, or Prophets of the Church, but Teaching of the Presidents. The very first one you can click on is Joseph Smith. Under the great plan of salvation, you will read, the prophet, Joseph Smith, said, I believe the Bible as it is read when it came from the pen of the original writers. Ignorant translators, careless transcribers, or designing and corrupt priests have committed many errors. And it's almost comical. Here's someone just making things up, yet he is accusing people of the exact same thing that he's doing. So, when we look at retrojection then in Mormonism, it's a rhetorical strategy that attempts to legitimize or elevate the importance of a person, place, or event. The book of Abraham is a total fraud. So when we look and we say, did Jesus Christ come to North America? Where all of these wars, where there's scimitars, we can go, no, this is all false. Therefore, Joseph Smith is a total false prophet. But what Christians don't do is they don't apply the same standard to Islam. Back to Hajj. All of that was to get to where we're going with Hajj. Behind me, you see a picture of the Kaaba that is in Mecca. It's kind of in the middle. Safa, and I'm going to tell you the significance of Safa, and Marwa kind of are, one is at the top and one is at the bottom. What Muhammad said happened between Safa and Marwa is where Hagar and Ishmael went back and forth in order to, when they're looking for water. And Abraham is with them. So the question is then, was Abraham in Mecca? Is Safa and Marwa on Hajj one of the obligations of Islam? Is this historically accurate? So let's start from Bukhari. When Abraham had differences with his wife because of her jealousy of Hagar, Ishmael's mother, he took Ishmael and his mother and went away. They had a skin of water with them. Abraham kept going on a hill till he reached the place where the Kaaba is situated. Where was Abraham? Well, we'll come back to that. He made Hagar sit under a tree and left her and Ishmael there with a skin of water. When the water was used up, Hagar became thirsty and Ishmael started crying with thirst. Hagar went to see if she could find some water and saw Safa, the nearest hill. She stood on it, and by the way, this is a picture of Marwa. She stood on it and looked around to see if there was anyone to help her, but found none. She then went to Marwa, this other little hill, and did the same, but found no one. She repeated going between Safa and Marwa 7 times. How many times did they go around the Kaaba? 7 times. They go 7 times between Safa and Marwa. And so literally this is the little hill, Safa. This is the turnaround at Marwa. And so Safa and Marwa are classic examples of retroactive attribution. Claiming this is the actual site of Abraham visited is an attempt to elevate this area. The Kaaba and black stone is another example of retroactive attribution. If you can say Abraham built this, that's way better than even Princess Diana's car, the Kaaba. And so he not only claims Abraham, but he's illiterate and probably forgot that he claimed Abraham. So he says, yeah, one time he even says Adam did it. So let's look at the historical account of Abraham and Hagar. When did they live? Is there any evidence that Mecca existed? There is zero historical evidence that Mecca even existed at that time. We're talking about 2,000 years BC. There's zero evidence Adam would have been anywhere near the Kaaba. The first hints at something in this area is about 100 years before Christ. This area is a desert. The oldest historical documents do not support this. So let's look at the travels of Abraham. If you see roughly where Ur is, you're going to see he goes up, then comes down roughly to where we would say Israel is today, and that's his journey into Canaan. Where is Mecca? It's off the screen. It's nowhere even close. When we look at this time of this conflict, we can go back to Genesis 21. Early the next morning, Abraham took some of the food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set her on her shoulders and then sent her off with a boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba, which we happen to know where it is. So Abraham moved his tent and came to settle by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron. So we go back and we see that little tent. That's roughly where Hebron is. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. What is Hagar's nationality? Egyptian. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road of Shur. The road of Shur is going to what country? Egypt. If you were thrown out of the house and you're Egyptian, where likely would have you gone? To Egypt. When you see the Bible, it totally makes sense that she goes that way. You are the God who sees me, for she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well, and it gives the name of the well, Bir Lahai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. And so let's look at roughly where that well is, where they think it is today. Hagar goes back likely, she is going on her way to get there. The Lord says, essentially, this is kind of what's going on. Her son Ishmael is then found living between the two in Paran, between Egypt and Israel. Now, how many times have you heard that Islam is an Abrahamic faith? by Christians. That is utter nonsense. Just like the book of Abraham was written by Abraham's hand. Yet Christian leader after Christian leader stands up and goes, this is an Abrahamic faith. It is not. We should not be giving the same credibility to someone who is clearly lying about this. But Christians do it over and over again. The Pope will kiss the Quran and say, they have the way of salvation. There's another way. You have Christians, evangelical, Southern Baptist, who say we share an ancient tradition of both Abraham. And he made this up. We must understand its retroactive attribution. The skeptics, scholars know this. They're like, no, Abraham was nowhere near this. There's no evidence. You can go back through the Quran. You can see he was making up stuff over and over again. He tries to convince people he isn't. It's recorded in the Quran he's making stuff over and over again. Why are we still believing these lies? So now when I read, or did they say he made it up, rather do they not believe, then let them produce a statement like it if they should be truthful. I just did in Genesis. Those statements are true. Hagar, more than likely, went down to Egypt to be with her family. Yes, Muhammad just made it up. He didn't like the Jews. He chose Ishmael over Isaac. It's that simple. Now there's some funny things about this well. You can go get Zamzam water there. This is going back to Bukhari, their most trusted source. When she was on Marwa, she heard a voice and said to herself, be quiet. She listened carefully and heard it again. She said, you have made me hear your voice. Have you got something to help me? And behold, an angel, Gabriel, digging in the earth with his heel or wing till water flowed in that place, Zamzam. Hagar started making a basin around it with her hands and began to fill her skin with water. The water was flowing as fast as she was filling. And you can now buy Zamzam water. They have the Zamzam well. And they sell it. If you go to Islam question and answer and you want to know a little bit about Zamzam water, the messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, said, the water of Zamzam is for whatever it's drunk for. This is a Hassan hadith. So this means it is a valid hadith. Scholars and righteous people have experienced this. They have drunk it with the intention of fulfilling some needs, such as healing from sickness or being freed from poverty and distress. And Allah fulfilled these hopes. Allah knows best. So if you're going to drink from a well, it's better to have that retroactively attributed to Abraham, Hagar, Ishmael. Let's go back and again, look at their most trusted source. The prophet, Peba, if you ever see that, is peace be upon him, said, may Allah bestow mercy on Ishmael's mother. Had she left Zamzam to flow naturally, it would have been a flowing stream. Abraham came back afterwards and saw what had happened. He was informed by Gabriel that Allah had ordered him to build the Kaaba there and to call the people to perform pilgrimage. So Abraham started raising the foundations of the Kaaba, and Ishmael was handing him the stones. So that picture of the Kaaba and Safa and Marwa is not from Abraham. Understand, this is all made up. There's nothing based in history on that. Continuing. While they were building, Abraham said, O Lord, accept this service from us. Verily you are the all-hearing, all-knowing. That's taken from Quran. Then Abraham went on building, and Ishmael was handing him the stones, and they were both saying, our Lord, accept this service from us. When the building became high, Abraham could no longer lift the stones to such a height. He stood on a stone and moved it up with him to help build the Kaaba. When they finished, Gabriel brought him the black stone from heaven, and Abraham placed it in his place in the Kaaba. So we can go, did that happen? No, Abraham wasn't anywhere near there. He was in Hebron when this happened. He did not somehow walk. If you ask, for example, ChatGPT, can you walk today from, and I did this, it was kind of fun. I said, can I walk from Hebron to Mecca? And it said, you can't do that because of roads, there's borders. And I said, no, if there is no roads and borders, how long would that take? Are there any oases on the way? And it says, absolutely, there are no oases on the way. You would likely die. And then I said, could I do this if I had a young child? And then it stopped it. It said, this sounds dangerous. It basically said, I will not help you any further. And then I put, well, could have Hagar and Ishmael did that? And then automatically it flips. And it's like, well, according to however you look at this, if you want to look at this theologically, it's a beautiful story. And I said, let's look at it academically. And it said, no, this is impossible. You cannot go from Hebron down to go that way. Not that I use that as my example. We can just see it is a desert. People didn't go that way. Again, retroactive attribution. Now look at what is recorded in their most trusted source. And we'll stop. I think this is probably a good stopping point for this session. I asked Anas bin Malik, did you used to dislike to perform tawaf, that's the going back and forth between Safa and Marwa? He said, yes, as it was part of the ceremonies of the day of pre-Islamic period of ignorance. So Anas bin Malik is so trusted. And this is recorded in Bukhari, and he's saying, no, I didn't like doing it because it was based on pre-Islam pagan practices. Even their own historical documents show that this has nothing to do with Abraham. Till Allah revealed, verily the two mountains, Al-Safa, that means the Safa and the Marwa, are among the symbols of Allah. It is therefore no sin for him who performs the pilgrimage to the Kaaba or performs Umrah to perform the tawaf going back and forth. So at the end of this session, what I want people to realize is retroactive attribution of Abraham to Islam is no more valid than retroactive attribution to the book of Abraham is to Abraham in Mormonism. We need to open our eyes. We need to take a little time to study what's happening, to read these things so we can answer Islam correctly. And that's a great spot to stop for tonight. So thank you. Any questions? That was a lot to cover, I know. So
we have a few online.
Sure.
We'll do those first.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So the question is, it's not spoken of much, but what can you tell me of the collaboration of Nazi Germany with Muslim clerics during World War II? And what has changed, if anything, regarding Muslim intent to continue their takeover of the Western world to include the Islamicization of America as they have done in Europe?
That's a great question. So for those who couldn't hear, the heart of the question is there is collaboration with Islam and anti-Jewish forces throughout history. And so the specific one was the Nazis. When you look at Islam partnering with different groups of people, and you look at America today, a lot of times we see things that are coupled that seem very odd to be coupled. When you look at, for example, maybe the LGBTQ movement and Islam, like Queers for Palestine or something like that, it seems very odd. On one hand, you see homosexuals being thrown from the top of buildings, and then the other hand, you see this and what's happening with that. And what I'm going to say is we're going to talk a lot about deception and scheming in Islam. And I'm going to put a pin in that because we're going to be talking about that in a later lecture at great length. It is a phenomenal way to look at what happens when you read really sweet things in the Quran that say you believe what you want to believe. And then you read other verses that say, well, wait a minute. You're to kill Christians and Jews. Don't even have friends among them. And we're going to learn about this doctrine called abrogation, where a later saying abrogates another saying. But we'll be getting into that. Great question.
We have one more online question. Then if anybody has a question, just raise your hand and somebody will come to you with a microphone. The online question is, in Northwest Arkansas, where do the most Muslims live? Like, are there any?
Well, they're going to be, international companies and universities is where they'll primarily come. So if you want to run into Muslims and just meet with them, I would honestly encourage people to. A lot of times they're having booths. I had a great conversation with some in Bentonville Square, for example. They had a booth up, and just go talk to them and ask them questions. If you're down by the university, the student centers there would love to, the Islamic student associations will absolutely talk to you. They do quite a few outreaches. They're everywhere, and so that's what I'd say. But as far as we're so small here, there isn't some cities have a traditional Chinatown or whatever, and a lot of people confuse beliefs. And sadly, because some people in Arkansas are very confused on people from India, and we have Tata here, Indians for far and wide are generally not Islamic. And so they're secular. Most of the ones who are here, very secular, and they may have some kind of cultural Hinduism, but it's rare to even meet an actual, what you would call Hindu, even here. So great question, but I don't know the answer of where specifically.
Question for you. So we are obviously not the first people that have discovered discrepancies in the Quran and these anachronisms. So how do Islamic apologists and scholars combat these claims?
Oh, some of them are just downright funny. Yeah, it's really hard. So the first response you're always going to get, I don't even care what it is deny. So if I say, for example, dirham coins, the very first thing they're going to go is, you don't know anything about Islam. This guy knows nothing. And then you point it out and they look at it and they're like, well, I don't think it means what it says it is. And you're literally staring at it. Now, if you don't have the evidence with you, you don't have a phone or whatever, and you're like, well, you said chainmail, it didn't exist. Well, maybe it meant something else. Maybe it doesn't mean. There are no answers to a lot of this. Most of what you get is kind of like grandstanding. You don't know what you're talking about. I know the true Islam. The number of times you'll hear, I read the Quran, that's why I'm Muslim. And when you actually ask them, well, what surahs spoke to you? What about it stood out to you? It goes crickets. It's just all made up. They're not saying it. So most of them, what's been hard is actually the internet. The internet has really challenged a lot of things, because if you're in Indonesia for the longest time and you're doing things in Arabic, you're not reading the Quran's not really accessible in Indonesian, then it's not a problem. The internet, and what's odd about this is a lot of Christians say shining the light of truth on what's being said is not kind. It's not nice. So you'll have someone go, well, this isn't Abraham, this is made up. And do you know where a lot of the criticism is going to come from Christianity? And going, that's not how you evangelize. That's not what you say. And so a lot of times I'll respond to that. If, for example, someone would come to my clinic and I'm doing a mouth exam and I'm looking for cancer, and I see oral cancer in there, sometimes what I have to tell them is really hard. If I see a squamous cell carcinoma, I'm going to be like, yeah, this is really serious. And a lot of times, what do I focus on? I focus on the disease, not on the treatment. So I'm going to say, this squamous cell carcinoma, left untreated, you have about a 30 to 50% chance maybe of not living in 5 years. This is a serious disease. But with treatment, now when you're giving people the treatment for it, we're going to have to remove a huge part of your tongue. You're going to probably have to have radiation to your face and all of these things. But we're not giving the diagnosis second. Somebody comes to my clinic and I go, oh, we're going to have to cut off have your tongue, and I don't do this, by the way, I refer this out, and we have to radiate you and you're going to get radiation burns, they're going to be like, what is this guy talking about? What we have to do as Christians is we have to be comfortable telling the truth. And the truth is the most loving thing we can do. And we have forgotten that. We think that telling the truth is not nice. The house is burning down. I'm going to jump up and down and scream and yell to try to get the attention. Well, that's awkward. You're extreme. You're whatever. And sadly, that's what's happened. So most of the pushback, I would say most Christians experience when reaching out and things like this of telling the truth is a lot of times from Christians. The Muslim apologist, oftentimes they know it and they don't answer it. And then they'll automatically go to, when did Jesus say he was God? Why do you have, and I'm like, time out, we'll get to that. But let's do this first. And so they're really well trained to deny, ignore, and attack. So, great question. One in the back.
Hey, I was wondering, to a Muslim, is the Quran like a greater version of the Bible, or is it more of an additional version to the Bible, like the Book of Mormon would be to the Bible?
That's a great question. So, for those who didn't hear, how do Muslims view the Quran? Do they consider it, Mormons would say, another testament? However, most Mormons, when they get a contradiction between the Bible teaching, plain and clear teaching, for example, in their gospel principles, we pay the debt in order to, if you're a Mormon, you pay the debt to go to heaven. It's in Gospel Principles, I think page 23 through 27. Jesus is the bank. He initially takes the sin on top of us, and then we have to work that out. And we keep paying Jesus back for this. The cross is nothing. The atonement happened in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus had the great drops of blood, according to Gospel Principles. So when there's any conflict between the Bible, they automatically say what Joseph Smith said. Ignorant translators, you don't have the Bible. You'll hear that over and over again in Mormonism. Well, you don't have it. Look at how many different translations there are. Look at how many manuscripts. So what I would say as a Christian is we have to understand how we got our Bible. And there's some phenomenal books. A General Introduction to the Bible, every Christian should go through, by Norman Geisler. It is just systematic, just click, 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 click. And it answers very simply all of those questions. And you know how you got your canon. And you can then easily defend it. This is not something that's so pie in the sky that you can't read a chapter, go tell someone, and then defend it. Now for Islam, it's even like sketchier than that, because they're told to trust the Injil, which is the first 4 books of the New Testament, and the Torah. And they believe the Quran is perfect. So if the Quran is perfect, and telling them to go to the Injil and the Gospels, did we have the Quran? I mean, when the Quran was written, do we have the same Injil, those 4 books of the Gospel, that were at the time of Muhammad that we have now? The answer to that is yes, we have it. And so this brings, and we're going to talk about this probably next week or the week after that, the heart of what your question is. They 100%, I've not met a Muslim who says the Bible they have, the Quran is another testament of the Bible. All of them will say the Bible has been corrupted, you don't even know what the Bible says. The challenge is their Quran disagrees with them and tells them to go back and read the Injil and the Torah. And you can confidently say, at the time that Muhammad said that, we have the exact same one. But they will deny that, 100%. They will deny it. They cannot stand Paul. They say that Paul was, is the one who deified that. Then they'll go to the Nicene Council and go, that was made up. But the problem is so few Christians have spent an hour in church history to defend what were these church councils about. But they can tell them the latest podcast, they can tell them all sorts of things, but just not basic church history. And therein lies the problem. We need to be discipling on the foundations of Christianity. And we have made them look so difficult and so hard and so stressful. But honestly, it's really not difficult to defend I would say the floor of Christianity. The more you dig into it, the more beautiful it is. Great question, by the way. I love that. Any other questions? You guys did, there is one. Go ahead.
So you mentioned that the American church and Christians today often say Islam is an Abrahamic religion.
Yes.
When did the Christian church lose sight of the fact that Islam was a different religion? Because I understand we had the Crusades and stuff like that. At what point did it become normalized in Christian tradition that Islam is just a different branch?
So that's a great question. So Islam, and I would say to whom? So it's really hard to lump all of Christianity into one. So you can go back to Zwimmer and these writers who are going back and forth. You can look at some great Catholic writers that we have even. And how I look at, and I'm going to just borrow from Lewis. Lewis calls Islam a Christian heresy. Because essentially it is. It is within Christianity, but it's a total heresy. It's made up, just like Mormonism I would call a Christian heresy. Jehovah's Witness is a Christian heresy. They're things that are all kind of made up. Now, when did this happen? I think part of it is Islam for so long was not on anyone's radar. It is way far away. I remember my father and caring about this deeply in the mid-'80s, realizing, and what he was doing is he had a great background in philosophy, and he was writing these Christians on different doctrines that the churches held and debated over a period of time. And when he was writing them, he was shocked that a lot of the responses coming back to him were very fatalistic in this thing. And so he was digging at what are some of the origins of this fatalism that has been into Christianity, this determinism. And he started to notice a lot of these arguments against determinism. Early Christians Christians, contemporaries of Islam, were debating Islam because Islam is a deterministic religion. It says, they'll throw the Shahada on their head, and if God's going to save me, He's going to save me, and they'll run without a flak vest, and that's why they're so poor military, because they have so much determinism. The building out from that is you have pockets of people who saw this as a big problem. And then we got into this era of the Christian Shahada, and we kind of were just making, I would say, even easy believism kind of a thing. And in general, if you look at trends in education, what you're going to see is in education, we really became not as wise. And so you can go back and look at a fifth grade primer from the 1700s, and you look at what fifth graders know now, and it's shockingly different. We stopped teaching reason in churches. And you start looking at a lot of these movements, and they would literally criticize man's reason. Well, they wouldn't criticize necessarily math. Now, I understand there's vain philosophies and things like that, but you saw this anti-intellectualism often come up, and so with that became experience was the driver of why you're a Christian. And so we became fideists. And so a lot of us would know the statement, and I would love to do a series on church history. Church history is epic because there's really nothing new under the sun. But how many of you know the saying, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it? That's fideism. Do you know what a Muslim says? The Quran said it, I believe it, that settles it. So now who's right? A Mormon says, the Book of Mormon says it, I believe it, that settles it. Well, who's right? And it just became this dogmas that were totally meaningless. We don't know why we believe. Is there a God? Is there not a God? If I ask in this room and said, who in here can give me, and I know some people have gone to Summit, who can give me reasons for God outside of the Bible? I'm going to, and sometimes I'll be an atheist. Give me reasons for outside of the Bible. Can you name them? And can you defend them? These are things people can learn so easily, so quickly, that allows them then to debate. My youngest son, I could ask him. I've asked him before. I didn't even talk to him about this. He's back on spring break. He stayed up late last night. He may not be able to, but can you give me some reasons for God out loud? Really loud.
The moral argument, the teleological argument, the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, the argument.
Give him a microphone.
Sure. The moral argument from the existence of morality, the teleological argument from the design of life in the universe, the ontological argument from the necessity of God due to forms and causes, and then the cosmological argument from the first cause.
So all of a sudden he meets an atheist and there's no reason for God. A 13-year-old can go, actually, there's 5, 6, 7 reasons for God that have nothing to do with the Bible. And why do you believe the Bible? Do you see what's happened within Christianity? And this is not complicated. That's my challenge. We've lowered the bar for belief so low that it now, and so why am I not surprised? Well, it's because most of us want Zamzam water. We want God to take care of our health and money. So we want to live our best life now, and we know that blessings are not children. We know blessings are prosperity. And so we turned him into a vending machine. I'm preaching too long. So great question. I think that's it. I think you had the last one. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for staying late. Next week, I believe, is on the same time. It's back to 6 o'clock. So thank you guys so much. You guys were epic to stay up that late on a lecture on retroduction and anachronisms. This is literally a record for me. So I've not had any group at nearly 9 o'clock on something this academic. So my hat's off to you guys. This is for you.